Contrary to what you may have been led to believe, Super Mario Galaxy is not a game about space. It takes place in space, that's true, but when you look at things from a very wide scope, doesn't every game take place in space? If the events of the game occur on a planet with some semblance of reality, then it's in space. Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, Untitled Goose Game, they're all just as much about space as Super Mario Galaxy is. However, there is one level that's an exception to this, and I'm talking about the Space Junk Galaxy. This is the third main galaxy in the game. It has more of an emphasis on space than any other. Every galaxy has a different theme. There's a beach galaxy, a desert galaxy, and even a haunted house galaxy. But when you look at them all, the Space Junk Galaxy is really the only one with a true space theme. If you're wondering what's going on here, this is the third installment in a 15 video series on the level design of Super Mario Galaxy. I'm going through each of the main galaxies in the game and evaluating them pixel by pixel. So far we've covered the Good Egg and the Honey Hive galaxies, and I'd recommend you watch those videos before this one. The start of the first mission is a big departure from the large main planet that we got used to in the Honey Hive galaxy. The level geometry is much more sparse and spaced out, and the beginning of this level feels more like we're navigating through an asteroid field than jumping from one planet to another. Soon into the mission we come to a more full realized use of the pole stars. It's the first time we've seen more than just one or two in a row, and I think thematically they make a lot of sense for this galaxy. In order to capture the feeling of actually being in space that this galaxy goes after, I think the purpose of the pole stars here is to give the player the feeling of being in zero gravity. While it might not be a game about space, Super Mario Galaxy is absolutely a game about gravity. And being a game about gravity, it makes sense that the developers would want to incorporate zero-G into at least a few portions. Pole stars are far from my favorite mechanic in the game. For the majority of the segments in which they're present, they pose zero challenge and require even less thought. There's a couple sections in other galaxies where I think they're used well, but we'll get to those later. But for their intended purpose here of making the player feel like they're navigating through space with no gravity, I think they work. The only other way I can think of accomplishing this would be giving Mario some sort of a jetpack, and the notion of that is too absurd to even consider. After this first segment of Pole Stars, we come to this little group of 3 glass planets, on which we have to find 5 star chips. Little clusters of small planets like this are something that Mario Galaxy throws in every so often, and I absolutely love them. To me, they're a great realization of the main premise behind the hook of Super Mario Galaxy's gameplay. Being able to jump between planets at will never gets old, and it's a great way to show off the very delicate programming behind the game's gravity system. I imagine getting the transitions between different gravitational fields to feel just right took a lot of effort, and the end result is beautiful. One thing I really enjoyed as a kid, and let's face it, something I still enjoy now, is long jumping around and seeing for how long I can stay in the air. On little planets close together like these, we can get some good jumps in. The launch star here will take us to the next planet, which is shaped like a very traditional rocket ship, or so I thought. See, I always thought that this was meant to be just a retro-styled spaceship, as a way of keeping the Space Junk Galaxy on theme, but it wasn't until researching for this video that I came to realize it's actually based off of Olimar and Louie's ship from Pikmin 2. Big thank you to the Mario Wiki for that. Nintendo referencing another one of their series in a game isn't something new, but what makes this a big coincidence for me is that Pikmin 2 is actually the game I've been playing while working on this series. So because I'm always interested in doing what's never been done before, plus the fact that this next section with more pole stars isn't super interesting and I don't have much to say about it, I'm going to do a super fast review of Pikmin 2 as Mario moves through this next area. Are you ready? Here we go. Pikmin 2 is an alright game, but I didn't enjoy it nearly as much as the first. While the atmosphere and aesthetics are still great, most of the changes only bring downside. The lack of an overall time limit removes the great feeling of tension the first game had, and keeping the daily time limit without the overarching one makes it feel inconvenient. I like the purple Pikmin because there's an element of strategy to where you use them, which is helped by the fact they're harder to come by. I don't like the white Pikmin because anything that makes them unique feels contrived. Their immunity to poison isn't mechanically different from yellow being immune to electricity or red to fire. I really don't like needing them to dig treasure out of the ground, which feels like the designers created a problem and sold you the solution. I also don't like the emphasis on caves, which feel overly restrictive and annoying to get through. Not knowing what you're going up against makes it impossible to plan out, which means you'll usually have to go through a single one multiple times in order to get everything. Overall, I give Pikmin 2 a 6 out of 10. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Whew, Now it's time to turn that into a YouTube short. All I need to do is add a creepy AI voice. Once we save all the toads at the top of this next planet, we're greeted by the first appearance of the Starshroom. This ship becomes a staple throughout this game and Galaxy 2. It even made some cameo appearances in games like Super Smash Bros. I like how we can see inside the ship here, and it looks about what you'd expect for the toad equivalent of the Millennium Falcon. We know from Odyssey that they'll eventually be acquired by Crazy Cav Incorporated, so it's nice to get a glance into it while the toads are still independent. In the final area, the music switches to the underground theme from the original Super Mario Bros., which feels appropriate. Our objective here is to collect the 5 silver stars, while the blocks around us warp into place as we approach them. This area is one of those I think makes a fantastic impression on the first playthrough, but loses a bit of that pizzazz on replays. When we know that the blocks will appear underneath our feet, it's just a matter of where, it feels like a little bit of that magic is lost. Still though, it's an interesting section, no matter if we're playing it for the first time or for the 100th time. I particularly like how the blocks are actually floating in space and then they move to us, rather than just appearing out of nowhere. I also like the noise that the silver stars make when we collect them, and the spinning animations they do while following Mario around. It gives the impression that they're living, conscious things, not just items. I suppose that makes sense because they have eyes, but most of the objects in the Mario universe have eyes as well. I know that Nintendo gives less than zero thought to Mario lore, and they just include eyes on things like mushrooms and stars to make them look cute, but it's interesting to think about the reasoning behind it. Between the noises they make and the animations, the silver stars certainly seem to have more autonomy than a one-up mushroom, so why this might be is curious. Speaking of the silver stars, Mario Galaxy isn't actually their first appearance. That was Super Mario 64 DS, and they functioned in much the same way. I only bring this up as an excuse to say I like Super Mario 64 DS. I know a lot of people don't care for it, but it's probably my favorite version of the game. It's the only 3D Mario that Wario has ever appeared in, much less been playable. The controls don't bother me, as I think playing on a 3DS with the circle pad solves most of the issues, and the bonus content is a nice touch. Going back to this area specifically, it does require some precise and careful movement. I'd say it's actually more difficult on the 3D All-Stars version because, if you remember, the ring around the analog stick of the Wii Nunchuck was carved into 8 points. This meant that locking yourself into these 8 directions was pretty easy, and the game was designed with this in mind. With the Switch Pro controller or the Joy-Cons, it's easy to accidentally slip your thumb slightly to the side, and in a narrow section like this, that can mean you've got a date with a black hole. But hey, this is the third main galaxy, so it means the challenge should start heating up a bit. It might take new players a couple of tries, but getting these 5 silver, possibly self-aware, stars to converge into a power star should be easily accomplished. The second mission in the Space Junk Galaxy is Kamella's airship attack. It looks like the Toads have been busy as I've been discussing Super Mario 64 DS because they've already got a second Starshroom now. They might not be brave, but they certainly have a good grasp of aerospace engineering. We head right from these modern spaceships into Bowser's classic wooden ones. Unfortunately, if we explore around the first, we'll learn it's just about as barren as those present in the last mission of the Good Egg Galaxy. This ends up being even more disappointing now, because not only does this level have airship in the name, you'd think the designers might feel more desire to expand on what we've already encountered, now that we're further into the game. Maybe the game designers really did think players hadn't learned much at this point, based on the fact that this bunny up ahead drops the bombshell on us that we can get a bit more air if we spin after jumping. I would be shocked if anyone who's played Super Mario Galaxy had gotten to this point without knowing this. We don't have to talk to this bunny, so it's not like this patronizing information is being thrown in our face, but it's funny to me that the developers thought that someone who's played a minimum of 10 stars already, plus done the first Bowser Jr. fight, might not have known about such a basic mechanic. Then again, this is the company that included an instructional DVD with Super Mario Galaxy 2, so who knows what they're thinking. Up in the next ship, we have the introduction of the Koopa Shell for the first time in the game. The 3D Mario games have never quite known what to do with Koopas. They went from being rare in 64 to basically non-existent in Sunshine, to being rare again in Galaxy and Galaxy 2, to being more common in 3D World, although that game's cut from the same cloth as the 2D games, to being switched to NPCs in Odyssey. Goombas have been all over the 3D Mario games, but for whatever reason they just couldn't get there with Koopa Troopas. I suppose that's because the shell kicking mechanic they bring alongside them isn't conducive to many 3D level designs, which is fair enough. You shouldn't include enemies or characters if you don't think you can do them justice, and implement them in a way that improves the game as a result. You shouldn't add something to a game just because players expect it to be there. I have to admit, I don't think the design team of Galaxy quite knew what to do with them either. The Koopa shells appear more than the actual Koopas do. The prominence of the shell over its character invokes more the sensation of being a Mario Kart item appearance, rather than a component of a classic enemy. While the shell has a completely different use when it's underwater, we'll get to that in a later video. Above ground, they function basically like the coconuts from earlier levels, but with the alteration that we hold them rather than hitting them. Although the animation that plays when we spin near them is nice and clean, carrying them around just isn't as fun as hitting coconuts back at enemies. I guess it gives the designers more flexibility in the level design, but I always find myself trying to get rid of them as soon as possible. Thankfully, here we have a handful of treasure chests that they can be used to open, which double as a way to get practice aiming. If we have a keen eye when landing on the next ship, we might notice a smokestack towards the front that looks suspiciously like a warp pipe. If we make our way down it, we'll find ourselves in a room full of star bits. Not a bad reward for this early in the game. Even though we can gather quite a few normally, we want as many star bits as we can to feed the hungry Lumas in the observatory, who happen to be the most ravenous of the bunch. On the deck of this ship, we'll see our first living and breathing Koopa Troopas. I found it odd how they opted to have them walk on all fours here as opposed to just on their feet. Bipedal Koopas were already well established at this point, so bringing them back to this more animalistic feel is a strange choice. When I said earlier that I don't think the development team behind Super Mario Galaxy quite knew what to do with Koopa Troopas, this here is a prime example. They don't serve any purpose other than to supply Mario with the shells to use on the Rocktos on the other side. They don't pursue Mario at all, and their movement speed is so slow, I don't see any way they could actually be considered a threat. What's even more odd here is that despite the fact that there's clearly openings in the side of the deck for the Koopas to walk out of, they just appear in thin air right in the middle. It's just another small detail that differentiates them from a normal enemy, but the purpose of this eludes me. One time they were appearing right where I was standing after throwing a shell, which feels just like a cheap way to do some damage. The Octorok's cousins from the Good Egg Galaxy are back, but this time they don't send any coconuts Mario's way. This means that we'll have to use the shells, which I may not like as much as the coconuts, but to use those again here might feel redundant. The aiming with the shells can be tricky if we're trying to fire them from any angle other than head on, but I do have to admire the change of pace that they bring. Up on the next ship we meet Camilla, the boss of this mission. First off, I want to say that I really enjoy the music that plays during her boss fight. It sounds frantic, but still manages to be fun. The visuals of this ship are also different from the earlier ones. There's the red carpet and purple handrails, which, coupled with the music, do a good job of making this ship feel distinct from the others. The boss fight with Camilla is also great, and shows a natural progression of the challenges leading up to her. We started using the Koopa shells to open chests, then to defeat stationary enemies, and now we're on to defeat a moving enemy. This is a tried and true level design formula, introducing a new mechanic, testing the player with it, and then challenging them with it. Super Mario Galaxy uses this formula a lot throughout the course of the game, but is able to feel consistently fresh thanks to the sheer creativity behind the mechanics it introduces. Camilla is a fairly easy boss fight, especially if we stick to the more reliable forward throws instead of attempting a diagonal. One thing I like about her design is that she keeps the Power Star in the head of her scepter. Most other bosses in Super Mario Galaxy just explode into a star with very little reasoning behind where they were keeping it or what they were intending on doing with it. But Camilla is different. Power Star being in her scepter gives it and her more purpose. It shows that the Power Stars aren't just tokens for Mario to collect. They have real utility and can be used for nefarious purposes if they fall into the wrong hands. It's little touches like this that make Mario's victories all the more satisfying. The final mission in the Space Junk Galaxy is Terrantox's Tangled Web. The first section is much the same as in the first mission, so I'll take this as an opportunity to let us listen more closely to the music. It isn't as bombastic as the theme of the previous galaxies, with it mostly featuring some simple piano keys, but I think it does a good job of capturing the vast emptiness of space. Let's take a listen. The Sling Stars will take us to this large glass planet. This one is very similar to the capsule planet from the Good Egg Galaxy, in that we have to explore the exterior to find the entrance, then make our way through the inside. One thing I find impressive, especially for 2007 standards, is that we can actually see Mario's reflection in the glass. Who needs a PS5 for ray tracing? We had it on the Wii. Once we get under the glass, the terrain inside is a bit of a maze. This is the kind of planet that needs a glass exterior. If it wasn't there, it would be too easy for Mario to just jump over the walls. And if it was solid, we'd be dealing with some uncomfortable camera positions. When we land at the next section, the music immediately takes on an ominous tone, with visuals to go with it. These spiders are called spoings, which is way too cute of a name for such a creepy looking enemy. Come to think of it, these aren't technically spiders because they only have 4 legs. Maybe 8 legs would have just been too much for our delicate hearts to handle. I'm also sorry to tell you that if you don't like these guys, they won't be the only spider-like enemies we encounter in this series. The camera angle at the end of this walkway here does a good job of showing the next 2 steps of our path. The purple toad introduces us to the sling pod, and if we don't want to deal with him on the next planet, we can sling him off into space in the opposite direction. Don't worry about him, he gives us a to let us know he's safe. Because these sling pods serve a very similar purpose to the pull stars, I think it's fair to compare them, and between the two, I vastly prefer the sling pods. We actually have to aim with them, rather than just pull ourselves along a predetermined course, and because we can pull them in any direction, they offer more possibilities for discovering secrets. Perhaps the only thing that the pull stars have over them is that when we're stuck on a sling pod, we can't get off of them without flinging ourselves. Most of the time this doesn't make a difference, but you can see here that I missed the life mushroom. I can see it, but at this point there's nothing I can do to get it. But maybe this isn't so much a negative because I think it gives us a dash of risk and reward. The sling pods eventually lead us to Tarantox himself, who we see once we bust him out of his cocoon. He actually looks more like a Zelda boss to me than one from the Mario series. I could easily see him in one of the 2D Zeldas, like a Link Between Worlds or Link's Awakening, as he's menacing but still manages to be cute. Most of the bosses in Super Mario Galaxy look like they fit into a Mario game, but there will be others that look more appropriate for Zelda. Tarantox might be the most challenging boss a new player will encounter at this point in the game, given how we have to rely on the sling pod so heavily, and we were only introduced to them a few moments ago. We can walk around the rim, but the gravity here can be only described as the scientifically accurate term wonky. The direction Mario moves in doesn't do a good job of matching the direction we hold the analog stick. This field-tested wonkiness might have been intentional though, as a way of making the sling pods our more reliable form of transportation. The only way we can damage Tarantox is by hitting the bump on his back, causing him to flip over, and then hitting the bumps on his underside. This makes fighting him feel counterintuitive, because while hitting the 4 bumps on his sides will stop him from spraying poison out of them, they don't do any lasting damage. This means it might take a bit of trial and error to defeat him, but nothing too extreme. The last time we'll use the sling pod here will be to collect the Power Star, which wraps up the Space Junk Galaxy. Being the designated space level in a space game that's not actually about space, I think it does a good job. If you think about space being this dark, cold, empty place with just a drop or 2 of eeriness, the galaxy captures this well. The second mission, with the large emphasis on airships, feels like an odd placement next to the 2 that adhere to the theme more closely. I think it might have been more fitting in another galaxy, but sandwiching it in the middle helps alleviate this. Plus, the level design in that mission is particularly strong, so I'm happy to see it in any galaxy. So that ends our adventure in the Space Junk Galaxy. In the next video in this series, we'll be practicing our secret esports level moves, ignoring Luigi, and arguing about the pronunciation of bombs in the Battlerock Galaxy. I hope you'll join me there.